In 1943, German pilots spotted something new climbing toward them. Massive, blunt-nosed, almost ungainly. They laughed at first, called it the Jug for its bulky shape, dismissed it as just another American fighter that couldn't match their agile Messerschmitts. But then it dove, and suddenly German veterans who'd ruled European skies for years found themselves outrun, outgunned, and utterly outmatched. The P-47 Thunderbolt wasn't trying to dance with the Luftwaffe, it was trying to destroy it. And in the desperate air battles over Europe, this American heavyweight would become Germany's nightmare. A machine so relentless, so brutally effective, that even the Reich's top aces learned to fear the sound of its massive radial engine. This is the story of the P-47 Thunderbolt, and how it shattered Germany's illusions about American air power. Context: the fortress under siege. By early 1943, the bomber offensive against Nazi Germany had become a trial by fire. The Americans believed in daylight precision bombing, formations of B-17 and B-24s striking deep into the Reich through sheer defensive firepower. The theory was bold, the execution was carnage. German fighters tore through bomber formations with methodical brutality. The Bf-109 remained deadly, quick to climb, and armed with cannons that could shred a flying fortress in seconds. The FW-190 was even worse, a blunt instrument that ripped through aluminum and flesh alike. American escort fighters did what they could. The P-38 Lightning had range, but struggled at high altitude in cold European skies. The P-51 Mustang was still in its infancy, not yet fitted with the engine that would make it legendary. That left the P-47 Thunderbolt. At first glance, it seemed like an odd choice to save the bomber offensive. It was enormous, weighing nearly 8 tons fully loaded, more than twice the weight of a Spitfire. Its radial engine gave it a profile that looked more like an attack aircraft than a fighter. Early German intelligence reports noted it with curiosity but little concern. Another American design, one Luftwaffe analysis concluded, heavy, likely useful for ground attack, not a significant threat in air combat. They could not have been more wrong. Design: the flying tank. The P-47 Thunderbolt was born from a singular vision: build the biggest, toughest, most powerful single-engine fighter possible. Republic Aviation started with the Pratt and Whitney R 2800 Double Wasp, 18 cylinders generating over 2,000 horsepower, matched to a massive 13-foot propeller. The result looked like it had been designed by someone who'd never heard the word compromise. Its thick, barrel-shaped fuselage housed a turbocharger system that was the P-47's secret weapon. It meant the Thunderbolt could maintain power at 25,000 feet, 30,000 feet, even beyond, altitudes where other fighters gasped for air. Its armament was absurd. 8 50 caliber Browning machine guns, 4 in each wing, with 425 rounds per gun. When all 8 fired together, the P-47 delivered over 100 rounds per second, a storm of lead that could soar through an enemy fighter in a single burst. And unlike so many fighters of the era, the P-47 was built to take punishment. Armor plating surrounded the cockpit. The fuel tanks were self-sealing. The airframe itself was robust, capable of absorbing damage that would tear apart lighter designs. One pilot described it simply: the P-47 wasn't a fighter, it was a flying tank with wings. German engineers, when they finally examined captured examples, were stunned. One technical report noted with grudging respect, "The Americans have built a fighter that prioritizes pilot survival and firepower over all else. It is unlike anything in our inventory. But respect and fear are different things. The Luftwaffe would soon learn the difference. First blood, the jug arrives. The P-47 entered combat over Europe in April 1943, escorting bombers on raids into occupied France and the Low Countries. German pilots saw them coming and weren't particularly impressed. Compared to the sleek Bf-109 or the agile FW-190, the Thunderbolt looked slow, heavy, even clumsy. In those first encounters, German tactics seemed to work. Messerschmitts would bait the P-47s into turning battles, then dance around them, exploiting their superior roll rate and maneuverability. German after-action reports reflected cautious optimism. The P-47 was noted as well-armed and durable, but not considered a decisive threat. One squadron commander wrote, "The new American fighter is formidable in a dive, but can be defeated through superior tactics." But American pilots were learning fast. They began to understand what the P-47 was truly capable of and what it wasn't. The Thunderbolt wasn't built to dogfight at low speeds. It was built to dominate through energy, altitude, and raw power. Commanders drilled their pilots in boom and zoom tactics. Climb high, use the turbocharger's advantage, dive with devastating speed, fire a lethal burst, then climb back to safety before the enemy could react. Never turn, never linger, never play the enemy's game. And when P-47 pilots finally committed to this doctrine, everything changed. The shock of realization. By summer 1943, German pilots were beginning to report something unsettling. The Thunderbolts were no longer trying to turn with them. Instead, they were attacking from above, plummeting out of the sun at terrifying speeds, far faster than any Bf-10-9 could safely dive. One German pilot, Oberleutnant Franz Steigler, recalled his first encounter. "I saw the bomber formation and began my attack run. Then suddenly, tracers, everywhere. I broke hard, looked back, and saw this enormous fighter already pulling up and away. I tried to follow, but my 109 couldn't match the climb. It was over in seconds. What made the P-47 so devastating wasn't just its speed or firepower, it was the altitude advantage. Thanks to that massive turbocharger, the Thunderbolt could patrol at 30,000 feet with ease, altitudes where German fighters strained. From up there, American pilots could pick their targets, wait for the perfect moment, then strike like predators. German fighter groups tried to adapt. They attempted to climb higher before engaging, but that cost time and fuel. They tried head-on attacks, but that exposed them to defensive fire and made them predictable. Nothing worked consistently. By late 1943, Luftwaffe intelligence reports began shifting in tone. One assessment noted the P-47 should not be engaged at altitude, if avoidable. Pilots are advised to attack bomber formations quickly and disengage before escort fighters arrive. Another was more blunt. The American Thunderbolt is a significant threat. Its firepower, speed in the dive, and altitude performance exceed previous estimates. But caution wasn't enough, because the P-47 wasn't just escorting bombers anymore. It was hunting. The hunters become the hunted. By early 1944, the P-47 had evolved from defensive escort into offensive weapon. Fighter groups were given freedom to roam ahead of bomber formations, sweeping German airspace clean. Thunderbolts prowled at extreme altitudes, waiting for Luftwaffe fighters to scramble, then pouncing on them as they climbed. For German pilots, The psychological shift was profound. They were no longer hunters stalking helpless bombers. They were being hunted by an enemy that could see them from miles away, dive faster than they could escape, and destroy them in seconds. Günter Rall, one of Germany's top aces with over 275 victories, admitted after the war, the P-47 changed the nature of the air battle. We had to be cautious in ways we'd never been before. One mistake, one moment of inattention, and you were dead. Stories circulated through Luftwaffe squadrons of Thunderbolts appearing out of nowhere, their 8 guns tearing through entire flights before anyone could react. German pilots spoke of the sound, the deep, rumbling roar of that massive radial engine, a sound that meant death was diving from above. One harrowing account came from March 1944, when Hans Philippe, an ace with over 200 kills, led his squadron to intercept bombers. As they climbed, a flight of P-47s dove on them from 35,000 feet. Philippe never saw them coming. In less than 30 seconds, 3 German fighters were destroyed. Philippe himself was shot down and killed. If an ace like Philippe could be killed so easily, what chance did younger pilots have? And by 1944, the Luftwaffe was increasingly filled with those younger pilots. Veterans were dying faster than they could be replaced. Against the P-47, they stood almost no chance. Germany's desperate countermeasures. As the P-47 tightened its grip on the skies, German high command scrambled for solutions. They tried new tactics. Heavily armoured FW-190s, called Sturmgruppen, were formed to smash through bomber formations like battering rams, ignoring the escorts entirely. But the P-47 groups shredded them. The Sturmgruppen were slow, their armour making them easy targets for diving Thunderbolts. German engineers worked to improve the Bf-109's high-altitude performance. But every improvement came too late, too little. The Americans were producing hundreds of P-47s every month, each one flown by increasingly experienced pilots. Germany was running out of everything: fuel, pilots, time. Even Germany's Me-262 jet fighter offered little hope. Thunderbolts couldn't catch the jets in level flight, but they didn't have to. They patrolled near Luftwaffe airfields and struck when jets were most vulnerable, during takeoff and landing, when their speed advantage meant nothing. By the spring of 1945, the Luftwaffe was broken. Airfields were cratered. Fuel depots were empty. Experienced pilots were dead or captured, and circling above it all were the Thunderbolts. What Germany really thought. When the war ended, Allied intelligence teams collected documents and interrogated pilots, piecing together the Luftwaffe's internal assessments of Allied aircraft. What they found regarding the P-47 was striking. German technical reports praised its construction, noting the robust design, impressive armament, and sheer durability. One captured analysis read, "The P-47 represents American industrial philosophy. Brute force applied with precision. It is not elegant, but it is devastatingly effective." But the pilot interviews revealed the deeper truth. Johannes Steinhoff, a Luftwaffe general and ace with over 170 kills, was blunt. The P-47 was the fighter that broke our back, not because it was the fastest or most agile, but because it was everywhere, flown by pilots who knew how to use it, and supported by an industrial base we could never match. Another pilot put it more simply, "We feared the Mustang for its range. We respected the Spitfire for its grace, but we dreaded the Thunderbolt for its power. When you heard that engine, you knew death was close." By 1944, the P-47 was responsible for more German aircraft destroyed than any other Allied fighter in the European theatre. Not just in the air, but on the ground, as Thunderbolt groups strafed airfields, trains, and convoys with merciless efficiency. Germany's initial dismissal of the P-47 as a clumsy, overweight brute had been a catastrophic miscalculation. The Thunderbolt wasn't trying to be graceful. It was trying to win. And it did. Legacy of Thunder. By war's end, the P-47 Thunderbolt had destroyed over 7,000 enemy aircraft, more than any other American fighter in the European theatre. But its true legacy went beyond numbers. The P-47 represented a fundamental shift in fighter design philosophy. While European designers chased agility and elegance, American engineers embraced power and durability. For the pilots who flew it, the P-47 was more than a weapon. It was a lifeline. Robert Johnson, one of America's top P-47 aces, once returned from a mission with over 200 holes in his airframe. The aircraft was barely controllable, but it flew. Johnson survived. The P-47 saved my life more times than I can count, he said. It wasn't elegant, it wasn't graceful, but it was tough and it was loyal. And in a war, that's all that matters. For Germany, the Thunderbolt became a symbol of what they were up against. Not just a better fighter, but an entire philosophy of warfare backed by an industrial machine they could never hope to match. The Luftwaffe had entered the war confident in their aircraft, their tactics, and their pilots. By 1945, they had none of those advantages left. And circling above, rumbling through the broken skies of the Third Reich, were the Thunderbolts, relentless, unstoppable, and utterly without mercy. Reflection: Thunder over Europe. The story of the P-47 Thunderbolt is not just about a fighter plane. It's about the collision of two philosophies: German precision against American power. It's about adaptation, pilots learning to fight their aircraft's war, not the enemy's. And it's about inevitability, the crushing weight of industrial might turning the tide of history. Germany dismissed the Thunderbolt at first, seeing only its bulk and weight. They didn't see the turbocharger that gave it altitude supremacy. They didn't see the 8 guns that could destroy an aircraft in seconds. They didn't see the armor that turned pilots into survivors instead of statistics. By the time they understood what they were facing, it was too late. The skies over Europe belonged to the Thunderbolt, and the Luftwaffe never got them back. The P-47 Thunderbolt was America's answer to Germany's air superiority, a machine built not to dance, but to dominate. But the air war over Europe was filled with countless other battles, desperate duels, and stories of courage and tragedy. If you want to keep exploring the aircraft that shaped the skies of World War II, make sure you subscribe. Let us know in the comments which warbird story you'd like us to cover next. Because every aircraft has a story, and every story deserves to be told.